Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to That Trippi Show with Grandpa Joe and Alex Ashlow. That's right, I wasn't around last week because, daughter and baby are great, and so is the father of my grandchild.
First one, Joe. Congratulations to you and Christine.
Yeah, first one. So, and thanks to Alex and Simon Rosenberg for filling in for me. Timing didn't work out to be in both places at the same time. Anyway, Alex, it seems like you and Simon had things under control. And I really do appreciate Simon coming on last week. With just a month to go in the race, let's zoom out and get into where I see things. Did the VP debate change anything? What about Jack Smith's new indictment? We get into all of that and your questions. Alex, where should we get started?
You know, a lot of the questions we got this week were basically, it's been a couple of weeks since we got Joe's take on the race. So, Joe, we're going to put you on the spot right away. I know you and I know I was out the week before you were out. So wanted to just give our listeners a fresh update on where we see the race. And like I said, it's been a few weeks. Well, let's start with the presidential. Joe, my question to you is, do you still feel like it's shaping up to be 53-46 here? What are you seeing?
It's always been 53-46. It's always been that the structure, not the vote could be 51-46 or something, or it could be 46-46. But the structure of the race is 46 for Trump that are going to vote for Trump pretty much no matter what. And there's 53% of the country who has made a decision they're not voting for him. That's where the race could move to. It's where I think it's moving to. You know, and things have been relatively stable since our last show together, which is now a couple, 2-3 weeks ago. But, you know, the new morning consult tracker has it at 51-46 Harris. So, you know, and you look at the other national polls this week, Echelon has it 52-45, ABC 52-46, Reuters Ipsos 50-44, and NBC has it 49-44. So, you know, for I don't know how many months have I been saying it's going to be a 53-46. There's a structure to the race. That's the way it wants to go. Now, Harris has to make that happen. Walz has to make that happen. You have to get out your vote. You have to appeal in that 53%. People who know they don't want to vote for Trump, you have to appeal to people who otherwise might try to stay at home, you know, might just say, screw it, particularly with Biden was on the ballot, you know, forget it. I can't vote for either one of these guys. I'm staying home. That's how you get to a 46-46 race. Or you could get to 46-46 with some of them staying home and some of them voting for third parties. Again, the Democrat doesn't necessarily get that 53. But when you see what's happened after Harris became the nominee, where hell of a lot fewer people are saying they're staying home or having a tough time deciding and that they're moving to her, particularly Democratic base voters that are coming home. And then on top of that, the collapse of third-party candidates, RFK Jr., there's still some in there. Cornel West and Stein could make, pick a point or two up in places like Michigan that could matter in terms of the electoral college. But in terms of where this race is structurally, when you look at those polls, and yeah, I keep saying, look at Trump's national number. It's a lot of numbers between 44 and 46 in those polls I just cited. So, you know, I think that's pretty significant. Also, the new Cook polling came out of battleground states. Harris has a lead within the margin of error. In Arizona, she's +2. In Michigan, she's up 3, Nevada up 1, Pennsylvania up 1, Wisconsin up 2. Trump is ahead 49-47 in Georgia, and the two candidates are tied in North Carolina at 49 apiece. And that is, again, you know, so nationally, structure of the race, 53-46. You see it reflected in Trump's numbers. And then the battleground states, Harris has, it's tight. And that's where that third party, remember where it matters. You know, it only takes a few thousand votes in some of these states voting third party. So that's still a concern that we have to look out for and be vigilant on. But anyway, what else do you want to look into?
Well, you know, I think one of the themes I think of this show is probably going to be that everything matters at this point. And there's so, especially you look at, like you mentioned that Georgia poll, and we'll get to some numbers from Georgia in a little bit. But if you think about it, 49-47, Trump could absolutely get 49% in Georgia or get very close to winning in Georgia. He won it in 16. It was 20 something thousand votes in 20. I mean, it's razor thin. So all those things do start adding up and mattering. So I do want to look at Pennsylvania.
But even the hurricane, because of where it struck in North Carolina, could have a major impact on, do they vote? How's that going to impact those numbers? Is it really still a tie there? I mean, not based on anything that happened in the race, but just what's, other factors that are going to have an impact. So turning out those voters is going to be critical. And that's where I do think there's still an advantage, even in these places where it's a 1-point race or 2-point race in these battleground states. The Harris campaign, has an apparatus on the ground, I think, that's much stronger than Trump forces. So the get out the vote is going to matter too. I'm sorry, get back to Pennsylvania. I interrupted you.
We'll come back to some of that ground stuff too, because everything does matter at this point. Like you said, the hurricane, you saw both Harris and Trump went to Georgia. They had very stereotypically different how they handled it down there. Not sure that's going to get picked up that much. But look at Pennsylvania. It's still very clear that everyone is putting basically all their chips in Pennsylvania. Yes, people are campaigning and spending elsewhere. Trump's in Michigan. She's in Michigan. They're all in North Carolina. We can get to Wisconsin in a little bit, but he really can't win, as we've talked about, without Pennsylvania. And the race is really, really tight there. But I feel like there are enough polls out there. And Simon and I got to a little bit of this last week. I'm interested in your take, but there are enough credible polls out there that have her with a margin that's either just outside the margin of error or within it, that all these kind of red waving polls are not super credible anymore. And we'll get to the why there. But what do you think about Pennsylvania, Joe?
It's going to be close. It was 44,000 votes, I think, in 2020. It could be 77,000 or 18,000 this time around. It's not going to be multiple points, I don't think. And, the fact of the matter is, when we talk about, Trump can't win the presidency if he loses Pennsylvania, the fact is, if Kamala Harris loses Pennsylvania, it's going to make it tough too. Where do we make that up? Although we've got a lot more places to make it up than Trump does. But in any case, you have the newest AARP poll, which was done by Trump's own pollster, has Harris up 49-47. And Harris is winning women in that poll by 19 points. You compare that to the April AARP poll, Biden was down 5 in their April survey. And among voters 18 to 49, he was behind by a point. She's now ahead by 14 points of that group. He was losing independents by 6 points. She's winning them by 9. With Democrat women, suburban voters, rural voters, even voters without a college degree, Harris is outperforming where Biden was in April. Look, with all that, she's still in their poll only 2 points up. The thing I keep stressing about that is I don't remember where she was with blacks in this poll, but again, Biden was stuck around 70% nationally with blacks. People were bemoaning, he was at 95 in 2020. And I kept saying, look, we're in a dead heat, but he's going to get to 78 or 82 with blacks. And ergo, if you're in a dead heat when you have 70% of them, you're not going to be a dead heat. And you're going to go ahead when it's election day and more of them come home. She's already consolidated into the 80% with blacks. I think it's 82. I don't know where it was in this poll. But again, if she's at 82 today, I guarantee you she may not get to 95, but she's going to get to 88 or 92, something we're in there. And as these Democratic base voters, many of them, by the way, are on the edge of voting and won't really know till somebody knocks on their door on election day and says, come on, let's go. But that's going to happen.
For most of the people listening to it's almost hard to believe, especially if you're listening to like a political podcast week over week. You're probably very, very informed. You probably already have a plan to vote. If you don't, go make one, by the way. A lot of voter registration deadlines are coming up. If you might have moved, check, make sure you're registered. It's, I believe it's vote.org. And then there's a bunch of state links. But like a lot of people, and we keep saying this, we say this every time, a lot of people are not going to vote until they're essentially dragged to the polls to do so. And that's just the truth.
That's kind of my point. The Harris campaign has an operation in Pennsylvania. They know who's voting early, which is really important. So if you can vote early, it takes you off the list. But it's not about like not getting bothered by phone calls and stuff. It's about, you won't be, but the reason is they get to go and focus on people who haven't voted yet. And on election day, make sure those are the doors that they're knocking on and trying to provide transportation and help to get people to the polls and make sure they vote. They're doing the work. In Pennsylvania, I think Democrats have requested 881,000 absentee ballots or early vote ballots. Republicans have only requested 373,000. And once again, here's where Trump keeps shooting the party in the foot about early and mail voting, saying, it's a big problem, it's corrupt, it's fraud, don't do it, while the party keeps urging people to vote. So I just think that there's a lot of reasons if you're up by a point or two in a place like Pennsylvania. The one thing I think that's clear, though, is as she grew with these groups, as she consolidated a lot of the base votes that Biden was having trouble with, she did drift down with white men. Biden was doing in Pennsylvania in particular, maybe it was Scranton Joe or whatever, but he was appealing a little bit more. She's leaked some of that vote. That's what's kept it relatively close. But I do think more of the base will come home by the time and be out and voting by the time we get to November. Also, Alex, you and Simon started touch on this last week, but I wanted to expand on it to not be fooled by the red wave polls going on. They're starting to dump the same thing you saw where they just flooded the zone with cooked polls from Republican pollsters saying, or Republican leaning pollsters who were saying, putting out numbers that were just bogus and screaming the red wave was coming when it never showed up. And so, I tweeted something Simon posted. I tweeted, quote, Halloween is starting early this year. The scary BS red wave polls are out haunting again, and the press is buying it. The reality, Trump is stuck at 46 and Harris is breaking 50. Biden defeated Trump 46.7 in 2020. Do the work, and Harris will do that and more. I know you and Simon talked about winning the race in October, and that is what, Democrats are doing right now, I think.
And that's exactly when you get into that ground game point. And we talked about this earlier. When you start talking about the things, whether it's endorsements, whether it's a stronger ground game, these things actually do move, between a half a point, 1 point, 2 points or more. But which in a lot of these battleground states, that's all it's going to take. And you look at, and I know you wanted to get into this, you look at how bad the Trump field operation is. That is not a good sign for them.
It's a disaster. After Trump took over the RNC and placed a family relative, his daughter, put her in charge, they dismantled the entire, first of all, they needed all that money to pay for the legal bills, so they stopped spending it on.
And her singing career,
lots of things that did not involve get out the vote or any of the ground game stuff.
I should clarify, I don't want to besmirch Laura Trump like that. It's his daughter-in-law, which might actually be worse because she's married to one of the sons. But continue.
Yeah. The point is that they've now been outsourcing the field organization to various PACs, which, by the way, I'm not sure the money's getting to the ground game either. They're not going into the pockets of the people running those PACs, but that's a different story. But it would be shocking to see that happens inside some Trump super PAC, right? Some organization. Anyway, it's also why the cash deficit matters with what Kamala Harris and Democrats have been amassing compared to Trump. And again, he's got other expenses he has with the legal problems. The political piece had, said the Republicans starting to raise alarm about Trump's ground game. They're outmatching us in money, in enthusiasm, and in the ground game. One Michigan-based GOP strategist said. So when you start, that's what I'm saying. You match up the 1 or 2 points ahead in a place like Michigan or Pennsylvania, and you get when Republican-based strategists in a state are saying they're outmatching us in money, in enthusiasm, and in the ground game, and that the RNC totally destroyed the ground game, took out all the resources, fired most of those people. And it's now sort of, a hodgepodge of whatever can be put together versus what the Biden campaign had been building for 2 or 3 years in these places and that Kamala inherited and built on.
And that's a really important point because they know the Biden campaign knew they needed it. And they knew they needed to be able to turn people out because they saw the enthusiasm gap. Obviously now Kamala's inherited that. I do want to just point out.
She inherited that But what that organization inherited was energy, excitement, the change when she got the nomination. One of the reasons they needed it with Biden, and they knew they needed it, was there were people who, like, look in the Black community, were 70% for him. And they needed a ground game to really touch those voters and make sure not only that they got out, but that they moved towards him. A lot of that happened the second that she became the nominee. And she's done a great job. Her campaign and her have done a great job of it. You can see it. The energy that change made is now being inherited by that strong organization that had been built over a few years in these states. That's a 1-2 punch that you can have a great organization and not a lot of energy when you're knocking on the door and the person on the other side of the door is like, what the? But when you have both those things combined, that is a big advantage. So I think that's why I think it could be the two. You're usually right. I mean, Alex, you're right. It's usually like, you can count on the organizational stuff to maybe make up a half a point, maybe 1 point, if you're lucky in most places. But when you've got that kind of energy, the number of volunteers that got enthusiastically plugged into those organizations that were being built by the Biden effort, you add that all up, and I think you could get into a 2-point difference or slightly bigger. It's really difficult to make up much more than that in an organizational game. Although Democrats are better at that than Republicans. And part of that is because our votes are more the same thing that causes the problem with the Electoral College in the first place, that we tend to have more of our votes in cities and places like that. And so when you have a state where like Pittsburgh and Philly and then everything in between isn't our turf, that's actually a big advantage for us in the get out the vote game, because we know where those voters are. They're close together. We can get many of them. Their voters are spread out across those outside the cities. And so it's actually harder for them to go door to door or do the things to get their vote out. So there's a bunch of different advantages that happen, but I think the Harris campaign is taking advantage of them. And we're seeing that. I think hopefully we'll start seeing that with the early vote counts on who's voting out there early in these states where it's reported.
I do just want to point out how important, if you can afford it, an in-house or in-campaign field operation is, in terms of, and we got into this a little bit with Simon last week, but if you, the campaign, are able to ID your voters, figure out who's voting for you, who's already voted for you, and that's the important one, and get people off your lists, all that data flows up. And then that informs the ad strategy and everything else you're spending money. And you're being just so much more efficient hitting your voters and not hitting the voters you don't need to. If some PAC is doing your field, or you're kind of hoping some PAC is doing your field, you have no idea what those voters are getting. Now, yes, there's so much money out there that some of it doesn't matter as much. But when we're talking about these margins, efficiency and actually using your resources as well as you can, again, that's another point. That's a half a point here and there. It really does add up.
You don't even know where to go to. If a PAC out there is trying to get out your vote, that's who's in charge of getting it out. You don't know whether you should be going where in North Carolina. I mean, as your campaign, I'm talking as just campaign schedule. It's not connected to the campaign in any way. And also, it can't possibly be all that great an organization. I don't mean that. It's not something that you've built over years. It's something that the RNC tore down in a matter of months, and there's nothing there. And now you're trying to rebuild it with chewing gum and Scotch tape. I just don't think that's going to play out. But the other thing is, things are happening. Again, we talked about the energy, but, checking in on Georgia, the registration data there is really good for Democrats. 129,000 voters have registered since the Harris transition. 51,000 of that 129,000 are Democrats registered as Dems. Only 13,000, we're talking 10%, roughly 10% of the 129,000 registered as Republicans, and the rest registered as unaffiliated. And most of those new registrants are young. 56% of them are under 34. And 53% of them are voters of color. So if that's going on in Georgia, I mean, these are just numbers that we have in individual states that we can go over. But you got to remember, Biden won Georgia by something like 14,000, 16,000 votes. So that's what I was talking about before, Alex, is the organization that Biden was building in these states now has that kind of energy because of Harris, the transition of Harris, of like people coming out of the woodwork and registering, younger people registering, people of color registering. And those people are going to be on that organization's list. And some of them are volunteering. So all that added bump is like a double whammy that Trump's going to have trouble with in some of these states.
I know we got to get to a few more things. I want your take on the House and Senate, but you look at everything else. Cook's new survey shows that I think it's like now plus 11 that in battleground states that people think Harris is going to win. There's more enthusiasm there. Jeff Flake endorsed Kamala this week. She's campaigning with Liz Cheney, I believe, in the birthplace of the GOP up in rural Wisconsin, which is pretty big. New York Times Ed Board endorsed Kamala. I know that's going to swing a lot of votes. But wanted to get to a listener question before we move on. This is from Blake in South Carolina. Did the vice presidential debate matter at all, Joe?
No, I don't think it did.
Hey, I said everything matters earlier.
No, everything matters. But I think that Walz won the debate, in my view, clearly with that one moment when he turned to Vance and said, Donald Trump lose the election or not. And that whole exchange going into January 6th was clearly, when you looked at the dials, when you looked at even I think Politico and others who were looking at independents, that moment, JD Vance lost independent vote and really lost a lot of ground with independents, and Walz won them over. Walz had I think a 13-point bump in favorable, all that. And so, yeah, like, does it matter though? No, I don't really think it'll matter that much. Again, I thought from the beginning, structure of the race, 53-46, nothing happened in that debate to change the structure of that race, and all that. Again, the 53% that I think are available to Harris-Walz, I don't think any more of them decided that they're going to stay home, or because of something JD Vance tripped up Walz on or any of that stuff. I don't think that you're going to see the debate make many people think, oh man, I'm going to have to vote third party now. I think that the majority of that 53 points is still available. First of all, she's like, that ticket is, we're up at 50-51. I think it's still moving in that direction. I don't think any of that does. I mean, things like Iran's attack in Israel and how Israel responds and those kinds of things still matter, or still forces out there that could change that dynamic and get people, create a problem. But that debate isn't one of them. In fact, I think the debate, and I'd say this, I think he really helped us with independence, but I still don't really believe a whole lot of it.
It's more of a reinforcement. Yeah. I do think, by the way, you get to the January 6th stuff, and it totally agree on that front. You look around, you look at how, what Liz Cheney's going to say in Wisconsin. It's very clear that, remember those people from Republican primaries who voted for Nikki Haley? I almost forgot her name, Joe, but like those breadcrumbs we used to talk about are still very much there. And it's very clear that these numbers say they're still there. Joe, I do want to get to the Senate. I do want to get to the House. We're just about out of time, but if you had anything else, but let's go there next.
I was just going to say, though, that one of the things that I think did matter in the debate, this is one of the things I agree with Carville on. James Carville and I have long history. I consider him a great friend. I think sometimes he's out there on things he probably thinks I am. But I really do agree with him that the campaign should go all out and tie the lie, and just it really go all out on JD Vance for telling the lie that Donald Trump somehow was out there saving Obamacare, and really go to town on the threat that Trump every step of the way tried to destroy Obamacare. He would continue to do that. I mean, they need to get on that healthcare message. They have a great new ad out that does that, but I think he's right. They could really score points by relentlessly tying JD Vance to a lie that really, there's a lot of lying going on from Trump and Vance, but a lie that really impacts people's lives and their healthcare future. is that one. And you go back and start to tie in what would happen if they succeed in taking out the ACA and the pre-existing conditions we've gone, insurance companies would be back in charge, all the stuff that there's a reason they're telling that lie, because that's how popular healthcare and lowering the costs and negotiating for prescription drug costs to be reduced, and the things that Democrats have been doing these years, while the Republicans at every step of the way sided with the insurance companies and tried to stop any expansion of healthcare in this country. That's one thing I really believe. With Carville on, I think he's right, and I hope the campaign gets that message.
The one other thing we were going to talk about with the January 6th stuff still mattering, there was Jack Smith unveiled a ton of new evidence that if you read through it, it's pretty wild how what Trump was doing on and around January 6th. That's just one more thing that's going to be in the bloodstream. But it certainly, I'm not sure it goes to October surprise. But if you're struggling to gain any traction, and there's a bunch of undecideds out there who voted for Nikki Haley in the primary, that is not what you wanted to see.
You have to wake up. If you're not awake yet to what really happened on January 6th, if you weren't awake to what's really going on when during the hearings that Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger were members of that committee who've now endorsed Kamala Harris and warned everybody, no matter what, we can't have Donald Trump be president. Here's why. And it's in this new disclosed indictment proof that the court requested. Actually, the Supreme Court told the judge to do it, to look into whether the immunity that was granted, what it did with these charges. And the judge said, okay, prosecutor, I want a document that walks through this, and then the Trump people will be able to respond to it, and then they'll decide whether there's immunity or not. This is a hell of a read. It is unbelievable. I mean, not to any of us who have already known or read most of this stuff, but the things that clearly Steve Bannon and clearly Mike Pence and others were aware of and will have to speak to once this ever gets to court. There's going to be problems with that because of the Supreme Court and everything else. But you can read this thing. And by the way, there are a lot of people who have read it and think it's a wake-up call, that this is all real. It's not some hoax. This guy is going to do it again, and he's been saying that. So I think it's going to be another bad week for Trump and Vance. A really bad week, because all this stuff is going to be back in the mainstream of what people are seeing, even on social media. Even the people trying to avoid it will not be able to avoid this, I don't think. It'll be interesting to see how Fox covers it. I'm sure it'll be the Justice Department has been weaponized or some crap like that. But this had nothing to do with the Justice Department. This was the judicial system on a case and trying to determine whether he has immunity or not. And this, if you read this, there may be some questionable charges. I mean, where they can say, well, wait, his conversations with Pence as vice president, that's too gray area for us to allow in. But there's too many other things that are clearly private, including that the president had a meeting in which he made sure that the White House counsel wasn't there, but insisted that his personal attorney was there. And how he's going to claim that meeting was part of his official role in office when he wouldn't let his official White House counsel be there. And it wasn't personal when the only personal attorney was his personal attorney. I mean, there are some clear charges in here that are personal, not in his official capacity, and are clearly going to be outside of the immunity that the Supreme Court granted him. So those facts are coming out now, and they're going to be clear. And I still guess there will be tons of members on the Hill who will have their hands over their ears and go, no, I haven't seen the report. I didn't read it. I haven't seen the tweets, whatever. But there are Nikki Haley Republicans out there. There are Republicans who supported and revered Ronald Reagan and the rule of law, and saw Russia and see Russia and Putin as evil and bad folks and not the heroic figure that Donald Trump sees Putin as. So I think those people, we need to reach them with this information, and hopefully they will. And I think enough of them. But again, everything matters in terms of like if this just moves a half a point of people, that's going to matter. I just didn't think the debate did move half a point of people, but we'll see.
I know we said we'd get to the House and Senate. I think we got to do that another week, Joe. We're just about out of time.
We'll do it next week. Sorry to tease you guys. I'll just do a quick. I think we're going to win the House. I'll explain why. And I think the Senate is possible, but tough. And there's 2 or 3, 4 states that could make the difference. And we'll get into those next week. So thanks, Alex. And thanks everyone for listening to that Trippi Show. Thanks everyone for asking about Says Us. You can go check out the beta at sez.us and help us take back the town square. And it really is important. I've raised a lot of the money to build it, and we're still looking for people with net worth that might be willing to invest in an alternative to X that instead of tearing down, community helps build it. So I'd appreciate if you check it out. I know a lot of people out there who listen to this may know people who would be interested in helping us build it. And if you are one of those, please let us know.
And if you do want to help or reach out to Joe directly, you can just email him. It's trippi@sez.us is his email. And really appreciate any outreach there.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Someone will get back to you if you want to help. This podcast will always be free with support from our advertisers and is part of Resolute Square. Check out the latest at resolutesquare.com/Trippi. Please subscribe to that Trippi Show and leave a review on Apple or wherever you listen. Also, if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next episode. You can always send us a question to thattrippishow@gmail.com or leave us a question and review on iTunes. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone.
Resolute Square.